Tonight on Bridge City News, the Blood Tribe is mulling over a $150 million offer from Ottawa. We will explain what the money is for. The Alberta government will be investing close to $4 billion to help get more oil to market. And we hear from former Justice Minister Jody Wilson-Raybould, who speaks out about the SNC-Lavalin affair. Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. It was a tragic story that rocked our world. The Humboldt Broncos bus crash last April, which claimed the lives of 16 and injured 13 others. Today, we're hearing from the parents of Broncos player Logan Boulet, who donated 6 of his organs to help save others. Loris Alexander sat down with a family who has a message for all of us.
The Armley Corner will never be the same. Lives frozen in time on April 6th. Countless stories of pain and promise extinguished. Yet one family somehow found the strength to tell their story.
Well, every morning when I get up, I'm generally the first to get up. We go down, whoever's first goes downstairs, turns on lights in Logan's room, and I put my clothes on there. That's where I get dressed. If I have my shower first, I walk down there and with my robe on and put on my clothes, talk to Logan, and turn the lights on. And the last person to go to bed at night turns the lights off. And that's been like that every day.
Logan Boulet's brain stopped working just before noon on April 7th. What happened next would change their lives forever and spur a national movement known as the Logan Boulet effect.
He had suffered an irreparable and irreversible brain injury, and that he was not going to survive. And so Logan was very healthy, he was very fit, and offered his organs to, I said, well, could we donate organs? He's fit, he's healthy, there's someone who will benefit from those organs, that they can have a better life and that their life can improve.
6 people across Canada benefited from Logan's organs. Nearly 100,000 Canadians signed up to become organ donors.
It's overwhelming, the amount of people who've registered to become organ donors. It's also kind of heartwarming and to know that Logan has had an impact on people.
The Boulets hope to one day meet some of the people who benefited from their son's organs, particularly the person who got his heart.
I would love to hear Logan's heartbeat again, so whoever has Logan's heart, I would love to listen to that.
Logan is in heaven along with all the other Bronco family members. That's where Logan is. And we believe, and our daughter believes, that we will meet Logan again, that we will be with Logan again, and that we look forward to that day. I do anyway. I'm the oldest. But we look forward to that day, that when we'll be together as a family again.
For Bridge City News, I'm Loris Alexander.
A 39-year-old man was killed when the van he was driving collided with a truck on Highway 36 north of Highway 61 earlier today. Taber police say a 27-year-old female passenger and a child were also transported to hospital with serious injuries. Another child was transported by Stars Air ambulance to Calgary. A 60-year-old female driver of the truck was also taken to hospital with serious injuries. An investigation into the crash is ongoing. Last night's snow and cold temperatures turned this morning's commute into a battle to stay on the road. Wind gusts and black ice caused challenges on rural highways, with some vehicles sliding off the road. Thankfully for Southern Albertans, a Good Samaritan is never far away. While the snowfall is unwelcome for many of us, for snow clearing businesses, it's a gust of good fortune. A local snow removal company says while the number of snow clearings is significantly lower compared to last year, there's still plenty of work available for his employees.
Last year, our parking lots, depending on how many times how much accumulation we went there, there's anywhere from 20 to 30 times. This year so far, we're only at 10 to 12, which is a very average year for amount of snow pushes we've done. And then sidewalks, we go a lot less, and last year was 45 to 50, and this year we're 26 to 30. And the seasonal average we figure is 24 times a year, so we almost doubled our snow removal from last year.
The opioid crisis in Lethbridge has been overwhelming as it's taken the lives of many citizens. Mayor Chris Spearman tackled this raging issue at Tuesday night City Council meeting and says awareness is key.
What we might be talking about is the way that we've enhanced the police presence in the downtown. We've involved a voluntary task force and as well as the use of peace officers to really get a handle on the drug problem, provide more visibility in the downtown, to provide safety and security to the other citizens. Certainly, the challenge of the drug crisis has been the number of people affected and the number of people that are visibly using drugs, and how do we manage that situation.
March 11th is a big day for the Blood Tribe. That's the day the band will vote on a $150 million offer from the federal government. The Blood Tribe's claim is based on an event about 100 years ago when they say the federal government devastated the band's successful cattle business. The band claims in the 1880s they agreed to share the land with the feds in exchange for resources, expertise, and training. Ottawa took over managing about 7,500 head of cattle. The band says the herd was mismanaged, with many dying or were sold at a loss. The $150 million settlement would be the biggest ever payday for the Blood Band. To ratify the agreement, at least 1/4 of the band's registered members must cast a ballot with a simple majority in favor. A political action group has launched a billboard campaign in Calgary and Edmonton that asks whether Alberta should separate from Canada. Alberta Fights Back has put one billboard in both cities that display the question, should Alberta ditch Canada? The group says the goal of the campaign is to take the discussion directly to non-political Albertans. Analysts, however, say it's a message of frustration over pipelines and equalization payments that won't solve anything. The ads run until February the 25th. So how do you move oil if you cannot get more pipelines built? You do it by train. The Notley government says the province will spend $3.7 billion to move our landlocked oil to market by rail. Notley says moving the liquid gold by rail is a medium-term stopgap as projects like the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion remain in limbo. The province hopes to move up to 120,000 barrels of oil per day by the year 2020. Initial shipments of 20,000 per day are expected to begin in July. Alberta is leasing 4,400 rail cars. More than 3/4 will be new and the remainder will be retrofitted. The province estimates its rail plan will lead to $5.9 billion increase in revenue for a net gain of $2.2 billion. It was day 2 of the United We Roll pro-pipeline rally in Ottawa. Hundreds of truckers were downtown in our nation's capital demanding the feds reconsider bills which they say are devastating to our country's energy sector, including Bills C-69 and C-68. The protesters made the 5-day trek from Red Deer to Ottawa. No word yet if Prime Minister Justin Trudeau or any of his MPs met with the demonstrators. Amid calls from opposition parties for an inquiry into the SNC-Lavalin affair, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau defends the inclusion of former Justice Minister Jody Wilson-Raybould in a recent cabinet meeting.
I think it's extremely important that everyone have an opportunity to hear the different perspectives in this situation. That's why we welcome her going forward to the parliamentary committee, and that's why, quite frankly, both we are getting advice from the current Attorney General and she's getting advice from her counsel on what can be talked about that's not covered by privilege. At the same time, obviously, it was she had asked to speak to her former cabinet members, colleagues, and that's exactly what she did. I think we have a number of things going on. There's the Ethics Commissioner who is doing an investigation into this issue. The Parliamentary Committee is seized with it. We'll be hearing from her. We'll be hearing from experts. We'll be hearing from a range of people. It'll make the determination as to who it needs to hear from. But I think it is important that there be an airing on this situation at the same time as we continue to work on a broad range of big issues that matter.
Federal Conservative leader Andrew Scheer expressed his concerns after question period about the SNC-Lavalin affair.
Obviously, Justin Trudeau has had something to hide from day one. This all started with Liberals getting together behind closed doors to cut deals for their friends. He denied anything at all happened at all. He completely dismissed the allegations. And then his principal secretary resigns, but still maintains that he did nothing wrong. These are not the actions of someone who is innocent. These are not the actions of a Prime Minister's office that has conducted itself ethically and following the law. We're talking about interference in a criminal proceeding. So the fact that Gerald Butts might have resigned, the fact that they may have had a meeting today to talk about strategy is not good enough. Canadians deserve answers. We need those answers to come from an independent, outside person. It's always been about his partisan political interests. It's not about serving the best interests of Canadians. If Justin Trudeau truly wanted to serve Canadians on this and restore their confidence in our justice system and in his own government, he would not be stonewalling this. He would not be directing his MPs to cover up at committee.
Former Justice Minister Jody Wilson-Raybould made a surprise appearance in a cabinet meeting yesterday, a week after resigning from cabinet. She emerged from the meeting saying at this point she is still seeking advice as to what she can legally say on the SNC-Lavalin affair.
Am still consulting with my legal counsel, as I think people can appreciate or should appreciate the rules and laws around privilege, around confidentiality, around my responsibility as a member of Parliament. My ethical and professional responsibilities as a lawyer are layered and incredibly complicated, so I'm still working with my lawyer.
Were you pressured by the Prime Minister's office? Were you pressured by the Prime Minister's office?
Still working with my lawyer.
Dozens of people gathered outside of the charred remains of a Halifax home to mourn the loss of 7 children killed in a fast-moving fire. Locals also gathered to show support for the injured, grieving parents who were left behind.
You know, we need to be there for them, and it speaks volumes to the family. You know, the father who can't be here right now, or the mother who is by her, her husband's side. It just shows that we as a community are standing together and we are here for this family. It's just important that, we pay our respects for the children who lost their lives.
We've lived here for 2 years in the community, and ever since we've been here, it's really affected us, and we've got to know everybody here. And it's a really nice community, and we were just so shocked that this could happen here. We never thought, when you hear about these things in the media, you think these things happen far away, but today to happen so close and to happen to a family that's from Syria, and it was just a devastating blow to the neighbourhood, and we just hope we're here really to show our support to the family.
Meanwhile, in Brampton, Ontario, a vigil was held last night for Riya Rajkumar, the 11-year-old girl who was allegedly killed by her father last week.
No words can express the deep sadness we feel as a community, but through prayer, song, and poetry, we grieve together.
Priya Ramdan, Ria's mother, would like to thank everyone for the outpouring of support for her and her family. She has asked me to read the following statement to you tonight on her behalf, and these are in Priya's words. Today I wish to tell the story of my baby girl, my best friend, my everything. My daughter Riya, who was taken from me too early. Riya was always a happy and positive child. She loved life and was always excited about everything that life had to offer. She never liked to be negative and always saw the good in every situation.
Riya Rajkumar was the subject of the nationwide Amber Alert last Thursday night when she was found dead in her father's home. California and 15 other states have filed a lawsuit against U.S. President Trump and his emergency declaration to fund a wall on the U.S.-Mexico border. California's Attorney General accused the president of fabricating the border crisis.
So after the president took the steps of fabricating a crisis at the border and then declaring a national emergency when he himself said in his pronouncements on Friday that he didn't need to do this, it became obvious that we had to step in, attorneys general from various states, because we have to protect the interest of our people. We have a right to make sure that the taxpayer dollars that we send to the National Treasury come back for the purposes that are lawfully designated. And the president now is proposing to take billions of dollars of funding from our states to use it to construct a border wall, which Congress would not willing to fund the way he'd like. And of course, that the president could not persuade Mexico it should pay for it. And so now he's asking taxpayers to cover the cost of his vanity wall, when in fact he would be taking money from very important projects like drug interdiction, police enforcement, to do this border wall.
It was on this date that astronaut John Glenn became the first North American in orbit. Tara Lipinski was the youngest gold medalist at the Winter Olympics, and actor Sidney Poitier was born. This is Today in History for February the 20th.
February 20th, 1962.
Godspeed, John Glenn. 2, 1, 0.
Roger, the clock is operating. We're underway.
Astronaut John Glenn becomes the first American to orbit the Earth, lifting off aboard the Mercury space capsule Friendship 7. 2003. A fire during a nightclub concert in West Warwick, Rhode Island, kills 100 people and injures about 200 others. Pyrotechnics for the rock band Great White sparked the fire, igniting flammable foam lining the club's walls and ceiling. The club's owners and the band's former tour manager later plead guilty to involuntary manslaughter charges. 1927,
they call me Mr. Tibbs.
Actor Sidney Poitier, whose roles include In the Heat of the Night and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, is born in Miami. And 1998.
When I stepped on the ice, I had a feeling like, I knew what the Olympics was about. I have that feeling of just like pure joy.
American Tara Lipinski becomes the youngest gold medalist in the Winter Olympics. The 15-year-old clinches that honor when she wins the ladies' figure skating title in Nagano, Japan. Today in history, February 20th, Carlotta Bradley, The Associated Press.
For the past couple of years, hundreds of buses in London, England have featured quotes from Jesus thanks to the founder of a new outreach ministry. As Peter Wooding explains, the new initiative has had a major impact on the city.
The founder of a unique initiative called Quote Jesus is seeking to share the words of Christ with as many people as possible in England's capital city through a unique advertising campaign. Howard Conder currently has quotes of Jesus on 100 buses across London, which he believes are relevant to the current political unrest in the nation surrounding Brexit. Conder first launched Quote Jesus 2 years ago after obeying a calling he believes he received from God to impact this nation.
The Lord really very clearly gave me the instructions to put the scriptures of Jesus Christ onto London buses. Now, it's a crazy idea in the natural, but I thought it was a brilliant idea. So I said to the Lord, that is fantastic. And within 3 weeks, it was amazing how to be thrust into a new ministry that only 3 weeks later, it was already on the London buses. We were having the scriptures of Jesus Christ. Some people.
So what do people on the streets of London think of these Quote Jesus posters?
What you think about these particular buses in London that we have scriptures of Jesus Christ on them? How do you feel about that? Do you think it's relevant?
So much.
You love?
Yes.
Believe in God, He helped us all. Jesus died for us on the cross, so we should do it.
Yeah. And what about you?
Yeah, I feel the same. Yeah, we both do. It's same feeling. So
I think it's fine. I mean, people can have what they want on the buses. So yeah.
It's a very good idea for the tourists.
Conder says these posters have already had a significant spiritual impact on countless lives, including that of a former alcoholic.
He would attend a church in his lunchtime in the city here, and he would go in there and pray to God and say, Lord, help me. I want to change my life, but I don't know. I don't know whether you're really speaking to me, listening to me, etc. And he came out of that church one day, and right in front of him was a bus similar to this, where it actually said on that particular bus, today you will be with me in paradise. And it just spoke to his spirit, and he think, that's it, I am going to give my life to the Lord now, I'm going to change my ways. And apparently he did.
So as many people continue to be provoked by these quotes of Jesus across London, it's hoped this campaign will unite the nation in turning back to kingdom and godly values. Peter Wooding for the Global News Alliance.
Kelly Williams is a senior pastor at a church in Colorado Springs, Colorado. He's also author of the book, The Mystery of 23, God Speaks. Pastor Kelly says when God does speak to you, it's important to be obedient even when you may feel intimidated.
If God is calling you, especially to confront someone in sin that might be seen as successful or powerful, don't allow their success to cause you to talk yourself out of doing what God has asked you to do.
Catch my full interview with Pastor Kelly discussing how to best obey God's voice. That's coming up in the second half of our show. Well, it was another treacherous day on the roads. Snow and black ice made for some dicey driving today. But good news, the snow should be tapering off soon. Complete weather details are coming up. We had a few more centimeters of the white stuff today. Tonight, more snow developing with a low near -17. Tomorrow, the flurry should taper off and we should see high near -13. Friday, mainly sunny with the mercury increasing to -1. Saturday, slight chance of snow again with the temperature dropping to -8. Sunday, a high pressure system returns, blowing out the clouds, and the temperature should drop to -14. Pretty much the same picture on Monday. Tuesday, mainly sunny again with a high near -10. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is +2 and an average low of -10. The highest temperature on this date was recorded in 1995 at 19 degrees, and the record low was a cold -31 in 1986. Sunrise was at 7:33, sunset at 5:57. Checking the national temperatures for tomorrow now, Vancouver will be mainly sunny and 5 degrees. Victoria will also have lots of sunshine and 6. Calgary will have a mixture of sun and cloud and should see a high near -10. Edmonton will be cloudy and should get up to -9. Periods of snow developing at -15 for Regina on Thursday. Light snow at -15 as well for Saskatoon. Snow and -11 for Winnipeg. Toronto had a freezing rain warning today. Tomorrow, rain mixed with snow and a high near +1. A chance of flurries developing in Ottawa with a high of 0. Montreal will have freezing drizzle and a high near 4 degrees tomorrow. In the Maritimes, Fredericton, New Brunswick will have snow and -1. Halifax, Nova Scotia will also receive snow and -3. Charlottetown, PEI will be snowy and -7. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, there was an extreme cold warning today. Tomorrow, snow and a high near -12 degrees. The National Energy Board is rejecting a call by an environmental group to expand its reconsideration of the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. Stand.Earth filed a motion to the federal regulator last month demanding it add consideration of the project's upstream and downstream greenhouse gas emissions. The NEB says its reconsideration is designed only to address issues arising out of the Federal Court of Appeal ruling in August that set aside its previous approval of the pipeline project. Canada's ambassador to the United States says he is hearing complaints from Americans about retaliatory measures taken by Ottawa over U.S. steel and aluminum tariffs. David McNaughton is talking about Canada's imposition of $16.6 billion in tariffs on American imports after U.S. President Trump imposed tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum. McNaughton says the tariffs are likely causing a lot of anxiety. He said many within the U.S. administration are pushing hard to have the tariffs lifted. Ottawa is spending $4.5 million to help the livestock and aquaculture sectors improve their codes of practice. The money is going towards the Canadian Animal Health Coalition. The projects will include changing the codes of practice for the care and handling of farm animals during transport. The codes of practice for dairy, goats, and farmed finfish will also be updated. Agriculture Canada says fish welfare is new and an emerging animal welfare concern. Canadians love their snacks. I know I do. Alberta Agriculture says a recent study shows the snack food industry is valued at $12.6 billion in Canada. One analyst says 1/3 of consumers replace at least one meal a day with snacks. Mood is also a major factor in snack choices. Some of the growing snack trends include smoothies, fries, and veggie snacks like cauliflower and artichokes. Alberta Agriculture says beverages are the most common snack item, which could provide market opportunities for both fruit and veggie producers. Now here's a look at today's markets. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, the Notley government says the province will spend $3.7 billion to move our landlocked oil to market by rail. The province hopes to move up to 120,000 barrels of oil a day by the year 2020. Initial shipments of 20,000 per day are expected to begin in July. Alberta is leasing 4,400 rail cars to move the oil. ISIS brides in Syria want to move back to Canada. Is it a good idea to repatriate those who left our country to fight for the enemy? Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari gives us her thoughts next. But first, here's a look at what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News Community Calendar. The Paw Society is holding its annual pool tournament and silent auction on Sunday, February 24th at Shots Billiard Club and Lounge, with doors opening at noon. Registration is $25 and players can register up to the day of the tournament. Donations for the silent auction are greatly appreciated. Come on out and support a worthy cause. For more information, call Joan at 403-732-5708 or visit pawsociety.com. Come and enjoy a community cabaret featuring live performances by Hippodrome, Pokeholics, and Jigging with Roy on Saturday, March 2nd at 7 p.m. at the Italian-Canadian Cultural Club. Tickets are $20 and are available by calling the Southern Alberta Community Living Association at 403-329-1525. Free Accessoride is available. For more information, visit communitycabaret.ca. Do you have a heart to serve our community? Streets Alive Mission is looking for volunteers to help serve hot meals, assist with Foot Friday, and help sort incoming donations. Visit streetsalive.ca to fill out their volunteer application or call 403-320-1159. And that's your Bridge City News Community Calendar.
The United We Roll convoy arrived in Ottawa on Tuesday as hundreds of truckers have been protesting Ottawa's policies on the oil industry and lack of more pipelines. The Yellow Vest movement has been part of that demonstration. Joining me now via Skype from Los Angeles is our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari. Lisa, the Yellow Vest movement also continues in France. Many are protesting Macron's government is high taxes, and it appears a lot of violent protesters are out there damaging businesses, lighting cars on fire, and the French people have said, you know what, we've had enough. A recent poll says 56% of the French want these protests to finally come to an end.
Yes, it looks like this is the first time that a poll is suggesting such a high number, 11% higher than the previous poll of French people who are upset about the protests. And I mean, that's an easy answer to that. It's because the protests have gone in a direction deviating tremendously from their original intent. As you remember, these Yellow Vest protests began back in November to show the disenchantment of the French people, mostly over the cost of the high cost of living, but mostly to protest the taxes on petroleum. And that slowly went into the fringes of society, as often these protests bring out very extreme cases. So you have the very far left, you have the very far right, and you have a lot of anti-Semitism, which has increased in recent weeks in France. So you have desecrated Jewish cemeteries with swastikas on the tombstones. You have different factions of the far left creating so much violence. And a lot of the French people who, again, originally were on board with the sentiments of these protests and the disenchantment with life and high cost of living, don't like to see their country desecrated in the way that it's been desecrated. Landmarks being torched and police cars being burned. And, that's not the point of this. And a lot of French people are realizing that if the protests continue, they will not have the intended purpose. They will not get to any significant resolution, and it will only do more damage to their country.
The unrest continues in Iran as 27 Iranian National Guards were killed by a suicide bomber last week. Security forces are facing increased attacks by the country's Sunni Muslim minority, Lisa.
Yes, this is a very unique story. Why? Because it's a little bit of a taste of their own medicine. We usually hear about the Iranian regime in the headlines as the sponsors of global terror, everywhere but their own borders. And now when you hear about an attack on the Revolutionary Guard inside the country, who are the terrorists in this case? It's not the Iranian people usually, but in this case, it is a minority group, the Baluchis. The Baluchis have been vying for their own independence for a very long time. They are Sunni. They follow the Sunni sect of Islam, whereas Iran, the majority of the country, follows the Shiite sect. And if you've been following this row between Saudi Arabia and Iran, this is the Sunni divide versus the Shiite divide. Now, who's sponsoring the Sunnis? Could it be Saudi Arabia, who would love to see some ruckus inside the borders of Iran? Perhaps. But again, a taste of their own medicine when you see terror inside the borders of Iran and not the government itself funding terrorism outside its borders.
The commander of U.S.-backed forces in Syria is asking the American military to not completely pull out of Syria. Muslim Kobani with the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces is asking the United States to leave behind 1,000 to 1,500 troops to fight ISIS.
Yes, so as the pullout becomes more real, and we talked about how the pullout initiated and will be completed in April, now we're getting some more detailed intel from the ground. And as the last battles against ISIS are being fought, as the last pieces of land are being clawed out of the possession of ISIS, the commanders-in-chief there believe that we need some more help, and that is to provide small amount of reinforcement so that not everything is lost, so that there is not a regression where they've made so much progress in getting ISIS, at least in this form, on the ground, isolated, defeated, and diminished. So a lot of these individuals who are from the ISIS territories are being put in these refugee camps. They're being totally dismantled. But the commander that you quoted believes that we still need some reinforcement there and is asking Donald Trump to reassess and to make some tweaks to his original plan.
A story which made headlines here in Canada and around the world are the wives of ISIS fighters who want to be repatriated and returned back to their home countries, including here in Canada, since their terrorist hubbies were killed. Public Safety Minister Ralph Goodale said, hey, you know what, they're not a priority. Now, speaking of the Islamic State, Lisa, U.S. President Donald Trump wants many European nations to take back its 800 ISIS fighters captured and put them on trial. And many of these countries, including France, are not in any hurry to do so.
Yeah, we can understand why. I mean, I've covered a lot of these cases about the buyer's remorse that these ISIS brides have once they go over to the Islamic utopia they thought they were going to. And often it's more that it was a change in circumstance more than a change of heart. Now, it's very, very difficult to repatriate these individuals back into society. Will they cut off their connection to their network? What kind of jihadi network have they created? As we know, a lot of this lives online and on social media. Will that continue? I mean, how will they integrate themselves back into society without us thinking that they will be a national security threat? How difficult will it be to actually put these individuals on trial? And I think, the Europeans, the Canadians, the US, we all have the same fears of allowing these individuals with this type of indoctrination and this type of ideology back into our societies.
Now, here's an interesting story. Saudi Arabia has lifted a long-standing warning against its citizens from traveling to Lebanon. That should warm up diplomatic ties between the two countries.
I don't know if anyone's in a rush to get that all-inclusive tour package to Lebanon or to Riyadh, one country to the other. Obviously, the cooling of ties is for a reason. It's because of this shifting of alliances in the Middle East. And of course, many Muslims travel to Saudi Arabia still because of Mecca, because of the pilgrimage that they make to Mecca. But is the other way around, is Lebanon is losing a lot of its tourism revenue from the warning that Saudi Arabia had given its citizens. So the Crown Prince is on a mission to make himself look a bit more moderate around the world, particularly in the Shiite world, that is gung-ho to have them pay for the Khashoggi murder. Again, the Khashoggi murder being the murder of a journalist on Turkish soil, being an excuse for more isolation of Saudi Arabia. And of course, the Crown Prince is not having that. So of course, he starts going around the Middle East with a tour and is softening his tone just a touch. And of course, the removal of this travel ban to Lebanon is part of that softening.
Let's make our way over to Europe now. Scotland is stepping up efforts to convince EU citizens to stay after Brexit amid concerns there could be workforce shortages in the largest of the UK's three smaller nations.
Yes, so we're seeing a lot of the potential fallout before there is a fallout. And of course, as you said, Scottish leaders are worried that there will be a shortage in workers. They are adamant about preventing this, or at least doing what they can beforehand to prevent this from happening. So they are convincing their workers to stay put, that nothing will change, that they guarantee it, or that at least they could stay for a while until things do even out. But again, this is a very interesting situation with Brexit, where we're seeing more speculation before anything has taken place. And because of that speculation, that fear and that uncertainty has truly made a dent in that policy and the lead up to it, and everything that Theresa May did to push that through. So we'll have to see. But again, this uncertainty, the predictions that have come in advance of it are quite interesting.
We saw the sad images of trucks carrying humanitarian aid being blocked from entering Venezuela, Lisa. U.S. President Donald Trump warned the Venezuelan military to abandon Nicolas Maduro, let the trucks in, or lose everything.
Yes, Donald Trump, he delivered a very, very strong message in Florida to directly to the Venezuelan people. He spoke to them very directly, very, very earnestly, and spoke to the military, and spoke to the families of those who had their loved ones lost in this civil war or uprising against Maduro. It doesn't look like Maduro is going to back down anytime soon. But the best that those who want to see him go can hope for is to have a deflection by the military, to have the military take the side of the people, to not side with Maduro, but to side with the people. And in doing so, allow humanitarian aid to get in, allow this to be a very peaceful transfer of power. That's what Donald Trump kept saying. He said that there will be a transfer, and we'd rather that it be a peaceful transfer, but that all options are still on the table.
Now, there's a real humanitarian crisis taking place in Yemen. The war there and economic collapse have driven 10 million people to the brink of starvation.
Yes, how the photographs coming out of Yemen and the civil war there, a true crisis, a true crisis. I mean, they're horrific. Children that weigh about 10 kilograms, and it's just not heard of. And we've been talking about this for a while. This humanitarian crisis is not something that just sprouted up overnight, but because the political uncertainty continues, because the United Nations cannot broker a ceasefire or any sort of deal between the two sides, this is ongoing. And of course, it's the people in Yemen that are going to suffer, and it's not going to be the Saudis or the Iranian regime that's pouring money into this proxy war that are going to give a damn for the Yemeni people. But again, a horrific humanitarian crisis. There are many groups that are involved, humanitarian or human rights groups that are involved in trying to get at least some sort of aid sent to the people. But again, we know what happens in these cases where the aid falls into the hands of the wrong people, whether they are intercepted or they don't get there or taken advantage of, etc. But it might be too little too late. There's a lot of people suffering and are victims of this humanitarian crisis.
Lisa, before I let you go, let's chat a bit about Bernie Sanders throwing his hat in the ring, wanting to become president in the year 2020. What are your thoughts and what are you hearing?
Well, yes, a 77-year-old Superman of sorts. He's not giving up on the socialist dream to be the socialist president of the United States. His age might be a deterrent, it might not be. I think he rallied a lot of support, and I think that if Hillary Clinton doesn't enter the race, I think Bernie Sanders believes that last time his chances were diminished by her and some unfair play. So hopeful, I think he's hopeful that this time around, if there's no Hillary, there might be a better chance. But his age is a factor. There are some other pretty big power players that are quite charismatic that are also running for that ticket. So I think 2020 will be a very interesting year in American politics. We have a lot of inexperienced politicians. We have a lot of social media gurus. We have a lot of people who don't belong in politics, as you can follow a lot of what's going on Twitter with a lot of these different characters. It's not a good look. It's not a good look. I think it should be an interesting election, and I think we have a lot of different factions in America that want to have their voices heard, and it's not just the coasts. And I think this election, 2020, will bring to light the very different groups, the very different desires, the very different upbringings. This comes up. It comes up whenever there is a vote about abortion or immigration or any of the other social or national security issues, and you see how different the backgrounds and the convictions of the American people are. So it's a huge patchwork of people. Someone like Bernie Sanders running again, it should be very interesting. But again, we all look forward to 2020 and seeing what will happen.
How about Trump's numbers? If an election was held today, would he be reelected?
Actually, I think there was a poll out last week that showed a 52% approval rating right after the State of the Union. I think many people believe that the State of the Union was a very strong address, that he was able to unite many who, he's not a likable guy, regardless whether you look at the Republican Party, the Democrat Party. He's not a likable guy in the sense that those who are hell-bent on hating him will hate him, regardless of his policies. We're no longer talking about politics, but I think a lot of, unfortunately, the American people have come to the place where they're judging politics on whether or not they want to go to lunch with the guy, not whether or not they want the man or woman to run this country, and what policies and where they stand on different issues. And it's sad. And we have younger voters coming into the ring, and this is how they do it. They recruit on college campuses, and it's about more of a feeling. It's more about a hashtag than anything else. That's why you have the introduction of anti-Semitism, mixed in with other issues like a pro-women's march, or a Black Lives Matters movement, or a police, Blue Lives Matters, or police brutality cases, etc. So I think we have to take a very long and hard look at where this country is headed, and to make the corrections now before it's too late, because there are some very, very wrong things with a wonderfully great country that are going on right now.
Lisa Daftari, thanks so much for joining me once again from Los Angeles.
My pleasure.
Does God still speak to people today? If so, how does he do this? And how can we discern whether it's actually God speaking to us? And if God is in fact speaking, will we obey his word? To talk more about this is Pastor Kelly Williams, Senior Pastor of Vanguard Church in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and author of the book, The Mystery of 23, God Speaks. Pastor Kelly, welcome to Bridge City News.
Hal, thank you very much for having me.
You bet. Sometimes God asks people to do very strange things, and your story has a few strange twists on it. Can you give a brief overview of your story?
Yes. In February of 2001, woke up from a evening of sleep at 1:23 a.m. in the morning, and I looked over the clock. That's why I knew what time it was, and I began to see a vision. This vision wasn't real clear to me, and quite honestly, it kind of weirded me out a bit, because I grew up Southern Baptist. I'm a graduate of Liberty University and Dallas Theological Seminary, and of course, they told me these sorts of things weren't supposed to happen, so I was trusting that I wouldn't experience anything like this. But I also tell people I grew up Baptist-Costal, and people say, well, what's that? I say, well, I've just been confused all my life. So because I have good friends that say, visions are for today, and I have good Christian friends that say they aren't. And in the midst of this, I experienced this vision. I didn't know what to do with it, so I ignored it. But I kept having it. It kept occurring at 1:23 a.m. in the morning. And so eventually I started writing it down in my journals. I got to a place to where I shared it with my wife, Tasha. And then eventually I shared it with my elder board, because I didn't know what else to do, because it kept occurring. And my elders encouraged me to go to this pastor. In the vision, there was a pastor that was doing things he shouldn't be doing in his private life, and God wanted me to talk to him about it. And so I didn't know this pastor, so I scheduled a lunch to get to know him. I knew of him. He did not know who I was. Sat down with him, got to know him, and eventually I asked him if I could share some things with him. I met with him. I read him my journals, and privately he confirmed that what God had revealed to me was true. And so I encouraged him to get help. He told me he wanted about a week to talk to his wife and that he would be in touch. And then about a week later, he called me from Detroit, Michigan, and I asked him what he was going to do. He said he had decided he was going to do nothing, and I said, I have to see this through, and so you're going to have to either give me a telephone number of spiritual authority I can discharge this to, or you're going to need to take the next steps in addressing this. And so he said he would call back, and eventually his chair elder called me, and in a couple of days I found myself in a meeting where I shared these same things with his elders. And sadly, I didn't see this bus coming. He denied all of it. And in the midst of it, his elder board called for my repentance. And it pretty much crushed me. I had a couple of elders on my board that were present. This pastor's wife was present. And how I went home after that and just kind of collapsed in the floor. I told my wife, I'm done. If I heard from God, I heard wrong, or if I heard correctly, I didn't handle it correctly. And so that sent me into a very dark season in my life for about 5.5 years. And then on November 5th, 2006, many in the Colorado Springs community won't ever forget that day. It was plastered across the evening news, the world news, the international news, that this pastor had solicited a gay prostitute and that he had bought meth. And as I sat there and as I watched that, I said to myself, this never had to be. It never had to be like this. And I just want to encourage your watchers and your listeners, if you see a Christian man, a public figure, man or woman, fall publicly, just assume out of God's mercy and grace, he sent scores of people to try to help that person turn back before it was too late.
So, Pastor Kelly, you say that putting out a fleece is meant to be a tool to help guide our decisions, not to control them. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, you go back to the story of Gideon, and he put out a fleece to make sure that God wanted him to do something. Then he put out another one. You can see in the book of Acts where they were trying to decide who was going to take Judas Iscariot's spot, and they sort of draw straws, or they kind of roll dice. And so there are things in Scripture that cannot be a substitute for God's word, his spirit, or his people, or accountability. But certainly after you have got a sense that God is wanting you to do something, a fleece is something that's good to use to get confirmation. And fleeces are kind of like coincidences that God has ordered so that you can know that he has spoken to you.
So you had to make a choice yourself as whether or not to obey God, as to confront your friend. How did you justify and how did you harmonize that?
Well, there was a lot of tension, Hal. I found it very difficult. And of course, you hear people say, don't touch God's anointed. And there's a variety of scriptures that I think oftentimes get taken out of context. And for me, it was very important that I listen to God's voice and do what he says. And I've learned, after 17 years of this, that regardless of the outcome, there is no substitute for God's obedience. And if God is asking you to do something, it may not turn out like you thought it would. It may turn out very poorly, but that does not mean that God does not want you to do something. And so I just encourage those that are watching, if God is calling you, especially to confront someone in sin that might be seen as successful or powerful, don't allow their success to cause you to talk yourself out of doing what God has asked you to do.
Did you ever doubt yourself as you're going through this journey?
About 1 trillion times. And I had to go back to God's word. I had to go back to those I was accountable to. And I had to say to them, have I done everything I'm supposed to do? Did I go about it the right way? And I think anyone who does what God asks them to do, if it doesn't turn out like you thought it would, you're going to have times of doubt.
So, Pastor Kelly, let me ask you something. Even though you confronted your friend who was caught in the sin, do you think maybe God was also putting you through a test?
Yes, I have very painfully learned that sometimes, because I said to the Lord when I watched him fall publicly, I said, Lord, this could have happened without me doing anything. And so I'm confused as to why you would bring me into a situation in such a strange and miraculous way. I would do all the things I did, carry all the weight I did for so long, and yet it turned out like as if I didn't even need to be a part of the equation. And I felt like that it was very clear to me. And one of the things that this friend of mine said to me along the way was one of the greatest tests of our character is how we handle someone else's sin in the public sector. And that has stuck with me, that God at times wants to teach us about ourselves through what we have to deal with through other people.
So why do you think it is sometimes we as people have a tendency of hardening our hearts and justifying our actions when we're confronted publicly?
Well, God said to Israel, you're sorry, but you're only sorry because you got caught. And it is very difficult for human nature to repent when it has been publicly shamed. And I just want to say to those that are watching, God does not want to publicly shame his children. He never desires to cause harm to us. He wants to redeem us. He wants to restore us. The sacrifice of Jesus Christ makes that very clear. But if we choose to ignore the promptings of the Holy Spirit and those he sends to help us, he will use whatever means necessary to get our attention because he loves us. But as I've watched with people who have to be caught publicly, it takes them much longer to come back to God because human pride gets in the way and creates a lot of complications along the way.
Yeah, that's very true. Now, can you explain for our viewers what you mean by spiritual PTSD?
Yes. I find I'm in a military town in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and people who come back from war find themselves traumatized by what they experienced in their past. And so for me, I found myself traumatized in the spiritual realm by what I had experienced through this situation with this pastor. And I found that I was caught in my past and the trauma was hindering me. And there were tremors of emotion that hindered me from being able to faithfully do in the present what God had called me to do.
Did you ever get angry at God during this journey that you went through?
I did get angry at God, but I more questioned myself and I more doubted whether or not I had gone about it the correct way. And so I second guessed myself and I felt a lot of shame, quite honestly, because of that, because I kind of felt like how that if God had revealed this to me and I had gone about it the right way, there would have been a different outcome. And so as I began to search the scriptures, one of the things that I began to learn is sometimes when you do what God asks you to do and it doesn't turn out like you thought it would, you feel a measure of shame. I think it's false shame. And the psalmist says that those that wait on the Lord shall not be put to shame. And so for me, I said, Lord, you're going to have to show me what it is and what you had in store and why you had me do this, because what I thought the purpose was turns out not to be the purpose.
You know, many Christian leaders have the mindset, do not judge anyone. But what does the Bible actually teach us about this?
Well, in a couple of places, Matthew 7 says that when you judge, be ready to be judged with the same measure. And so if you're going to confront someone about their sexual sin, you need to be ready to be confronted about your own sexual sin. But also the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 5 said that we're not to judge outsiders, unbelievers, and if we do that, we're in sin ourselves. But we are to hold one another accountable. And he does say we are to judge one another within the church and hold each other to a standard of holiness. And I just want to say this, and I want to remind the American church, the Canadian church, we're not going to spend an eternity singing loving, loving, loving is God Almighty. We're going to spend an eternity singing holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, the one that was and is to come. His holiness matters that much to me.
Now, did this pastor friend of yours ever repent of his sins? Did he ever come back to you and ask for forgiveness for his treatment of you?
I don't know if he repented of his sins. I can't speak of that. But I do know that he has never come back to me to make amends, to thank me, or to reconcile how I tried to help him.
So what message are you really hoping people will take away from reading your book?
It is my hope that people will take away two messages. Number one, what we do for God matters. And in the end, it's all that matters. And so I want to challenge your people who are watching that when God calls you to do something, regardless of how difficult it is, obey and do it, regardless of the outcome, and trust that in God's timing, He will bless you for your obedience to Him.
Kelly Williams, author of The Mystery of 23, God Speaks. Thanks so much for joining me today from Colorado Springs, Colorado.
Hal, God bless you. Thank you very much.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and have a great night.